Every day, hundreds of babies are murdered in the womb, while hundreds more mothers suffer the side effects of the dangerous abortion pill. The Food and Drug Administration knows this and have promised change, but so far have nothing to show for it. So we're going inside the court battles in the fight for life today on Restoration Spotlight. I'm Hayden Ludwig. Abortion has reached 14-year highs thanks to mifepristone, the drug used in the abortion pill. Now, the entire abortion industry is transforming from Planned Parenthood clinics to at-home procedures. But women haven't been told the truth about the risks involved, risks my guest today knows all too well. Gabriella McIntyre is legal counsel for the Center for Life at the Alliance Defending Freedom, here to unpack the legal battle over the FDA's decision to loosen abortion pill safeguards. Gabriella, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me.
So we've talked an awful lot on this show about how abortion is rising nationwide because of mifepristone, which of course is the abortion pill. And it's rising because you can easily and cheaply get it mailed to your house, no questions asked. Now, all of this is only possible because the FDA dropped most of its safeguards over the past 10 years, first under Barack Obama and then under Joe Biden, as you know. So, Gabrielle, as we get started here, I want you to set the stage for our listeners. What did mifepristone regulations look like when it was first authorized by the FDA in 2000 versus the way it stands today in 2026?
Yeah, sure. So when the FDA approved the abortion drug mifepristone in the early 2000s, it had what was known as became a risk evaluation and mitigation strategy. And what that means is that for a very high-risk drug, a drug that has a black box warning, for example, that says it could send women to the emergency room, suffering complications, or even lead to death in certain cases, the FDA puts particular safeguards on those drugs that regulate its use by doctors as well as by the actual women who are consuming them. So this risk evaluation and mitigation strategy included for mifepristone things like a gestational age limit, which used to be, I believe it was around 7 weeks, as opposed to now it's 10. It also included a regulation where it had to be a physician, the physician who is actually going to be giving you the medication or giving you the abortion drugs, so that if a complication did arise, that physician could actually step in and help to treat the complication. And these complications were expected. The original label on this drug states that roughly 1 in 25 women who take it are going to go to the emergency room. That's a pretty significant number of women, given the amount of people who actually consume this drug. And then there were other sorts of safeguards around the drug. In 2016, those safeguards were diminished, including a reporting requirement. So the FDA used to require that all adverse events, all serious adverse events, as well as deaths, be reported to the drug sponsor so that FDA could kind of keep an eye on what sort of adverse events were happening. In 2016, they removed safeguards as well as that reporting requirement. And then in 2023, there were, I guess I should backtrack a little bit, there were also 3 in-person doctor visits for this drug. So there was a doctor visit before you got the drug, the in-person dispensing requirement. So you had to see a physician in order to get the drug dispensed to you. And then there were 2 follow-up visits, one for the administration of misoprostol and one as a follow-up visit to make sure that the pregnancy was actually terminated, and that there were no other complications from taking the drugs. The 2 latter were removed in 2016 when those other safeguards were removed. In 2023, the FDA removed that last in-person dispensing requirement. So now, I say this quite literally, anyone can go online without ever speaking to a physician, a doctor, the prescriber, and order at the click of a few buttons these FDA-approved abortion drugs and have them sent directly to their homes. No screening for complications or contraindications like an ectopic pregnancy, and no screening for things like coercion or abuse, which is the current ecosystem. We are currently representing a woman named Rosalie Markozich alongside the state of Louisiana, who very unfortunately and heartbreakingly was coerced into taking abortion drugs by her boyfriend, who ordered them in her name online.
So I want to get into the Rosalie Markozich case, but I do want to make sure that people understand When this drug was brought into the United States 26 years ago, almost 26 years ago, it had a number of pretty common sense safety regulations that you'd expect. You mentioned all of them, right? But that began changing in 2016. The latter days of the Obama administration, they start dropping these requirements. And the biggest one that I think you mentioned here, at least in my opinion, begins in 2021, gets codified in 2023, and that is now you can get it in your home. You don't even have to go get an ultrasound. You don't have to go get a doctor. It's like Tylenol now. You can get it over the counter effectively, but you could buy it online. What was the impulse behind that? Why did the Obama and Biden administrations change those pretty sensible safeguards for a drug that you've already mentioned? Their own FDA said 1 in 25 women who take this will have to go to the emergency room. Of course, we know it's actually more like 1 in 10 or 1 in 11 these days because of some of the studies that have come out from my colleagues at Restoration of America Foundation, from the Ethics and Public Policy Center. You're very familiar with these stats. Help us understand what triggered that.
Yeah, so in 2021, it was what was called a non-enforcement decision. So during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2021, the administration had decided that it wasn't going to enforce this in-person dispensing requirement. But I think the real date that we need to hone in on is the June 2022 Dobbs decision. So that decision overturned Roe versus Wade, as we all know, and that gave the ability of the states back to regulate abortion. And many states did, including the state of Louisiana. These states already had enacted laws that would go into effect immediately upon the reversal of Roe versus Wade. And they protected unborn life from the moment of conception with very narrow exceptions. So unborn life was going to be protected in a number of states after the Dobbs decision. And the Biden administration did not like that. They did not want that to happen. They wanted to make sure that the abortion drug or abortion in general remained available in all 50 states, and explicitly stated this as well. So the Biden administration directed its FDA and HHS to come up with any way that they could think of to make sure that abortion remained available and to circumvent the Dobbs decision and evade those pro-life state laws in states like Louisiana. And so they removed permanently the in-person dispensing requirement. And I know I mentioned that anyone can get their hands on these drugs. Truly, it is that easy. You go online and you fill out a form, excuse me, and these FDA-approved abortion drugs show up at your door 2 days later from FDA-approved sources. And you have unacceptable situations like the situation with Rosalie that are happening now across the country and cropping up everywhere.
Yeah. So in other words, to put words in your mouth here, so we all know the national right to abortion was done away with because of the Dobbs decision. It was a terrible ruling in Roe anyway, but they basically said there is no national right. The Biden administration says, well, we're going to effectively create a national right, or at least national access to abortion, even if your state and the voters therein decide to outlaw abortion or heavily restrict it to any way. It's like we're still living under Roe is the effect, because you can live in the most pro-life state you could be in. Louisiana and Texas both have claim to that. And it's still as if you're living in almost California or Illinois, because the mail still allows you to buy this. Is that an accurate way of saying it?
That's right. And excuse me, the Society of Family Planning, which is a pro-abortion site, they have data that has been coming out since this has happened called We Count data. And that data shows that in Louisiana, the number of elective abortions should be 0. By the end of 2025, it was nearing 1,000 abortions being enacted in Louisiana by these mail order abortion drugs. And that's likely an underestimate, because that's just the reporting that we know of, straight from the horse's mouth, straight from abortion drug prescribers who are actually stating to We Count that they are sending those drugs illegally and unlawfully across state lines into Louisiana. That's 1,000 unborn lives a month that Louisiana is losing, that are being destroyed, despite the fact that they have some of the strongest pro-life laws in the country.
Yes, that's right. So, Gabriella, you mentioned a moment ago that you can get these FDA-approved pills. And as you know, there are 3 brands that you can get, 2 generics and Mifeprex, which is the original mifepristone abortion pill. But there's a lot of research. My own team has done some research at restorationnews.com pointing out there are actually dozens and dozens of unauthorized pill sellers, that you can buy pills that come from Vietnam or Russia or India or any part of Southeast Asia, for instance. These are not authorized or not regulated by the FDA. They're basically generics that are not allowed to be legally sold in the United States. And yet you can go on right now and you could buy them. It's breaking the law, of course. But it sure seems like this is the kind of stuff, that reason why we have an FDA, isn't it, to do this? And so give us, I guess my question is, tell us more about that. How can that even be possible to buy illegal off-brand generic pills from a pill that's supposedly regulated and controlled by our own federal government?
Yeah, so what you're talking about are the black market drugs. And prior to the 2023 decision and prior to the 2021 decision that stopped enforcing the in-person dispensing requirement, that was the only way for an individual to go online and purchase these drugs, was through these black market means. So like India, Mexico, other places that were selling these and importing them illegally into the United States. But now that the FDA has an approved version out there from either the two generic manufacturers or from Dango Laboratories, which is the name brand manufacturer, those FDA-approved sources are out there. So the same places that you would go, like Plan C and some of these other websites where an individual would go to see where are the places that I can source these abortion drugs. If you have the top 3 results on there already stating an aid access or a ACT or MAP, who are selling and sending these abortion drugs that are FDA approved across state lines, why would you ever go and purchase one from an overseas black market source? The FDA has created this ecosystem where its own FDA approved drugs are being illegally and unlawfully shipped into these states where it's illegal by prescribers who are certified to send these drugs per the FDA's regulations.
So tell us about the legality of, let's just stick with the authorized pills. You already mentioned them, right? Is it legal to ship those pills across state lines, say from California to Louisiana, under the Comstock Act?
So the Comstock Act is the most explicit prohibition. It explicitly states abortifacients cannot be sent in the mail via common carrier or via USPS. And that's exactly what the Biden administration sanctioned in 2023. So that is directly on point. You'll see the Fifth Circuit, Judge Ho, he has his concurring decision in one of the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine decisions that was before the court back in 2023 and 2024. And he states this explicitly. This is on point, and it's directly in violation of the Comstock Act.
Tell us more about Comstock Act for people who aren't familiar with it. What time period is this law from? What's the relevance today? Because if that's the law of the land, then this should be a pretty black and white, open, close, shut case here.
Yeah, it absolutely should be. The Comstock Act has been enacted for quite some time, and it does explicitly prohibit the sale of or the sending of abortion drugs, abortifacients. There's 2 different portions of this statute. One is the abortifacients itself, and the other is items that are intended to be used to perform an abortion. And that provision is what many folks take a little bit of issue with, obviously, because it could be a little bit broader, but the intent of the statute is very clear. If you are sending abortion drugs, explicitly abortion drugs, across state lines, that is illegal under the Comstock Act, which is a federal law, not just a state law like Louisiana that prohibits abortion drugs from coming into its borders.
So it's I think, 150-year-old law. That's on the books right now. That wasn't passed under the Trump administration. That's significantly older than Roe v. Wade. But it's not being enforced because of the Biden administration's decision to, reinterpret the law? Is that correct?
Or just flat out ignore it. It's very much a brazen attempt to circumvent not only the Dobbs decision, but also federal law that's already in place. It's very hard to argue that this does not, or pretty much impossible to argue that this does not violate the Comstock Act.
Okay, so let's talk more about the legal battles that you're involved in here. So you've already mentioned one of them. It's a predecessor to the current Louisiana case, the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine. That goes back a few years. So what happened to that case? And then bring us up to speed with the current Louisiana case, which is, my understanding is, that's the successor to the case that didn't, frankly, go our way a couple of years ago.
Yeah, so Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, that case was we on behalf of doctors and doctor associations, pro-life doctors, sued the FDA for violations of these doctors' conscience when the FDA deregulated the drug and removed those safeguards both in 2016 as well as in 2023. And this lawsuit also all went back all the way to the approval of the drug. But on appeal, it was just the 2016 and 2023 risk evaluation and mitigation strategies that were before the Supreme Court. But those doctors were in emergency rooms and treating women who were coming in as a result of the removal of those safeguards. And they were having to either complete abortions or feel as if they were being complicit in completing an abortion because of the position that the administration had put them in, that the FDA had put them in, from removing those safeguards and making the already high risk drug even riskier. So that went before the Supreme Court in 2024 in FDA versus Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine. And during that case, there was a very important concession by the FDA. The FDA's lawyer basically said, well, these doctors have federal conscience rights, and those federal conscience rights are broad enough to protect them in the situations that they're talking about from having to violate their conscience. So lo and behold, the case got kicked for standing purposes. But the very important thing about that case is that the Fifth Circuit had twice already ruled on the merits, and those merits were not actually before the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court was only looking at whether the doctors could sue in the first place. That's what standing is.
Interesting. Okay.
And so the Fifth Circuit had twice overstated that the 2023 REMS, in addition to the other, the 2016 changes, that was likely arbitrary and capricious, meaning it was unlawful under the Administrative Procedure Act. And now, fast forward to this litigation, which is on behalf of the state of Louisiana and a woman named Rosalie Markazich, who I mentioned before. The FDA has not attempted before the Western District of Louisiana, which is where we're litigating now, has not attempted to reassure the court at all that this is a lawful agency regulation. They've basically conceded that what they did in 2023 by removing the in-person dispensing requirement was unlawful. And yet they are still asking for a stay of the case, which is the relief that they're seeking. I can go into far more.
Yeah, no, I want to go in all these directions. So what you're saying is, you already actually identified in the first lawsuit, which lost on standing grounds, you identified the right attack vector. And the Trump administration's FDA is actually conceding that point, that the 2023 change to the safety regulations, I know they're REMS, but that's what the phrase I'm going to use, the safety regulations was capricious and likely unlawful. So you're honing in on what exactly the weakness is here. So sticking to that point, because I do want to hear Rosalie's story in just a moment here, because it is very tragic and people should know this. But stick to this one point for a moment here. So what is the Trump administration FDA now seeking if they've already effectively told the court, yeah, we think ADF is correct and Louisiana is correct on this?
Yeah, so what they're seeking, so we filed on behalf of Louisiana and Rosalie a motion for preliminary relief, which essentially would be putting back the in-person dispensing requirement while we litigate the case, so that no more unlawful abortion drugs are going to be funneled and blanketed or blanketing the state of Louisiana while we continue to litigate.
Through the mail, in other words.
The conceded unlawfulness. Sorry, say again.
Through the mail, in other words. So you would roll back to you have to get it in person if this lawsuit is successful.
Exactly. And that would be just while we litigate the case, since this is preliminary relief. On the opposing end, the FDA has come back and in opposition has asked the court to stay the case or pause the case, even though it concedes that this action is unlawful. It wants the court to keep that action in place while it conducts I think everybody has probably heard, its widely anticipated safety review of mifepristone. Now, the thing about that is that, first of all, why can't these two things happen simultaneously? Why can't the FDA study the safety of mifepristone at the same time as the in-person dispensing requirement is in place while we litigate? But also, the FDA could not give a timeline for when it was expecting to finish this purported safety review. They said and they promised that it would take, hopefully, sooner than a year to conduct a study. But there's no evidence that the FDA has even gathered the data that it needs in order to conduct that study, let alone the time period that it would take to review the additional materials it says it needs to review in order to conduct this study and come to a conclusion, and also the regulatory requirements that would take for it to actually take some action on the in-person dispensing requirement. We've estimated, even with the FDA's most the quickest timeline that they could present, that would be at least until 2027 that we would see any form of relief. All the while, an unlawful agency regulation would be in place.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to speculate a little bit here, but putting on my political strategist hat for a moment, 2027 would take us past the 2026 midterms, wouldn't it? I mean, what other reason do you think other than this? Because we've heard pledges, I believe, since January 2025 under HHS Secretary Robert Kennedy and FDA Commissioner Marty McCary that this, this wonderful, internal study is going to be coming out. We're recording this in the beginning of spring 2026. And it seems like the Trump administration is obviously and understandably concerned about the abortion issue affecting the 2026 midterms for Republicans here. Is there something I'm missing, Gabriella? Or, is there some substantive reason to not want this study that would force action by the FDA before people go to the polls in November?
I'm kind of at a loss as well. It seems very self-explanatory, especially given the concession that this is likely unlawful. The Fifth Circuit, they stated in their briefing, the FDA, that they essentially take the Fifth Circuit at its word that this is likely unlawful, and they make no attempt before the Western District of Louisiana to assure the court that it is lawful. So it's hard to imagine why we can't just do these two things simultaneously. The Trump administration's FDA could do its safety review alongside and in parallel to this lawsuit also taking place. But at least right now, we need relief now, immediately, so that women like Rosalie, so that states like Louisiana aren't going to be blanketed with abortion drugs or being coerced into taking abortion drugs that they do not want because of this mail order abortion drug scheme that is conceitedly unlawful.
So let's talk about Rosalie's story. So that prompted a lot of this. Louisiana obviously has an interest in, promoting its and protecting its own laws around life. Right. But tell us Rosalie's story, because that triggered a lot of this action, of course.
Sure. Yeah. So this is an absolutely heartbreaking story. And unfortunately, not so much as of a unique story that the opposition would like us to think.
Yeah.
So Rosalie is a young woman from Louisiana who in 2023, she found out that she was pregnant by her then boyfriend. At first, they were both excited to raise the baby together, but he quickly flipped a switch and decided that he no longer wanted to raise this child, and he wanted Rosalie to get an abortion. Rosalie stated to him multiple times she did not want to have an abortion, but he knew through his sister how to obtain abortion drugs online to have them unlawfully sent into Louisiana, where at the time, obviously, their law was in place, their pro-life law was in place. So he went online and ordered from a California doctor abortion drugs in Rosalie's name using her information and had them sent directly to her home. And one night when they were discussing this, they were alone together in a car, and he started acting extremely aggressive and frightened Rosalie, pulled over into a hospital parking lot and started yelling at her, saying, "You're going to ruin my life." And, long story short, Rosalie is a victim of past domestic abuse. And she felt cornered. She felt like her only option to save herself and have the best chance of saving her baby would be to take the drugs in front of him so that he could physically see her take them, and to, as soon as she can, book it out of the car and attempt to throw them up. So that he would see that she did this, she could get away from him safely, and then attempt to save her child. Unfortunately, because of the way that he was driving around, she wasn't able to get out of the car in time. She did swallow the drugs in front of him, but as soon as she got to the bathroom, she started bleeding and she lost her child.
My goodness. You mentioned how the boyfriend obtained the pills. Correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that was, at least allegedly, Dr. Remy Coito in Northern California. We've done some work on him. His sister is Francine Coito. They're both from France. They may be U.S. citizens now, but they're both foreign-born at the very least. And she is one of the founders of Plan C Pills, which is I think they're not themselves a retailer, but they're like a hub for connecting you to other online retailers. I mean, this doesn't seem like a mistake. This seems like a very large. I studied the activist left for a living. This is exactly the way that they tend to organize. There's always connections and domino pieces here. So, I mean, this seems like you're tapping into the very heart of this entire online abortion industry that, I mean, are most pro-lifers aware that it exists, that it's this to the scale, or that stories like Rosalie's are happening every single day?
If they don't, then they absolutely should. And this is just one, Remy Couteau. I'm thinking that that's how you pronounce his last name, but I'm not sure. So please bear
I
with
didn't
me.
take French in high school, so I don't know.
Yes, and he's actually been indicted by the state of Louisiana for sending the drugs unlawfully into the state. And Governor Newsom has stated publicly in a quite a crass tweet back to the Attorney General Liz Murrill that he is refusing to extradite Dr. Couteau because of the state's shield laws, even though this man sent abortion drugs to a man who then used them to coerce a woman to have an unwanted abortion. And this same situation, it bears noting, is happening in New York as well. There's another pretty notorious abortion drug prescriber named Margaret Carpenter. She was also indicted by the state of Louisiana for sending abortion drugs into the state to a woman who wasn't pregnant, who then used those abortion drugs to force her teenage daughter to have an abortion she did not want, killing her own granddaughter.
Wow.
And by all accounts, that teenage girl, she wanted to keep her baby. She was planning a gender reveal party. And it's just a heartbreaking situation. Same thing in New York. Governor Hochul has refused to extradite Dr. Carpenter, stating basically that she's proud of the fact that this woman is prescribing abortion drugs, even though those abortion drugs were used to coerce a woman, again, who did not want to have an abortion. You hear about these situations as well out of Texas. There's Catherine Herring, whose husband, now this wasn't with FDA-approved abortion drugs, but whose husband some years ago of 11 years poisoned her with the drugs. There are women who don't even know that this drug is being given to them, because when I say this, literally anyone can get their hands on these drugs. And
including men, by the way.
Including men, including abusers. I don't even want to think of the implications for traffickers as well, because that screening appointment, that one in-person visit with a doctor is likely for a lot of women the only opportunity to gain help and to gain assistance. Rosalie herself says that if she had seen a doctor, she's almost 100% sure that she would have her child, because she would have asked for help. She doesn't believe that a doctor, a prescriber, would have given her the drugs if she stated to them in person, I do not want them.
Right. You mentioned something earlier about California and New York. They both have shield laws. Explain what a shield law is, and then the constitutionality of that, because my understanding is 16 state attorneys general, if I'm correct, or something around 16, all Republicans, have asked Congress to weigh in on the constitutionality of this issue. So give us the background on that. In other words, why aren't these people who are allegedly criminals, right, doing criminal acts, being extradited to the states that are suing them on criminal grounds?
Sure. So in abortion favorable states like New York and California, these shield laws are the natural and foreseeable consequence of the 2023 REMS changes that removed that in-person dispensing requirement. It's kind of part two to the necessary plan in order to get these drugs into the states where they were unlawful. And that's basically what they do, is they shield, exactly what it sounds like. They shield prescribers who are unlawfully sending abortion drugs across state lines into states where they're unlawful. It shields them from any sort of liability. Some of them also have provisions for not only abortion drugs, but also gender rejecting drugs as well.
Delaware, I think, is one of them. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Most of them do. But for the purposes of these abortion prescribers, they shield them from any sort of liability. That means that they're shielded from investigations by other states. They're shielded from professional liability. They're shielded from a bunch of these consequences that a doctor in any other context would not be shielded from.
Right.
And the most sinister part about these shield laws right now for abortion is that in response to Dr. Carpenter in New York being asked, or the extradition request for her, New York then enacted a portion of the shield law that anonymizes the prescriptions.
Wow.
So now these abortion drugs, they don't even need to have the name of the prescriber on them when they're sent across state lines. So think about women who have a malpractice claim or who are trying to investigate how their boyfriend, for example, got their hands on these drugs and coerced them to take them. There's no way of knowing who it was who actually sent the drugs because of these anonymous dispensing laws. So it's becoming harder and harder because of this dual action in order to figure out which people are actually breaking the law, which obviously has a huge effect on states like Louisiana being able to even attempt to extradite these individuals. So the arguments for why they are unlawful could be, the extradition clause of the Constitution, full faith and credit clause.
Right.
It's really neat to see how just a few states can be preventing the extradition and the holding accountable of these individuals who are blatantly violating the law and continuing to do so. They basically state, I'm going to continue to do this unless and until this becomes unlawful federally. And that's exactly what we're asking for in our lawsuit.
Okay, so that's actually what my follow-up question was. That seems like it will end up in the Supreme Court. Is the full faith and credit aspect of this? In other words, if somebody murders somebody in Texas and flees across state lines, they have to be extradited back to the state where they're going to have the lawsuit, where they're going to be charged criminally here. That's not happening under these SHIELD laws. This is asking the Supreme Court to weigh in. So as we close out here, the Louisiana v. FDA case that you're involved in right now, what is the ultimate objective? Lay out if you got everything you wanted from the final injunction here, what would that actually achieve?
It would be vacating the 2023 REMS. So essentially going back to the regulation as it was in the first Trump administration, where you have an in-person dispensing requirement. These drugs would not be able to be sent in the mail. That means that pro-life states would be able to have some sort of recourse if somebody did unlawfully send them in, and be able to prevent other people from blanketing their states with unlawful abortion drugs and save the babies that they want to save in those states, and hopefully be able to protect the women in those states as well from anyone being able to get their hands on these FDA-approved drugs.
Fascinating. When do you expect the Supreme Court to rule on this?
Well, currently it's only before the Western District of Louisiana for our motion for preliminary relief and the government's opposing motion to stay. The two manufacturers, Danco as well as Gem BioPro, they have intervened in the case now, and they have motions to dismiss pending. So we still have a little bit of procedure to go through at the district court level. And then that would have to be appealed to the Fifth Circuit and then go before the Supreme Court. So we're expecting, we had a hearing on our motions last Tuesday, and there's supplemental briefing by the FDA that's due today. So we would imagine that the court needs to take a look at that supplemental briefing and then come to a decision. And then we'll see what happens after that. Wow. Well, best of luck to you in all of this. Gabriella McIntyre, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and all you're doing. Thank you. Thanks so much for listening. Super important case. You've just heard Restoration Spotlight, where we dig into the toughest issues each week with the patriots fighting to save our country. If you like what you hear and want to support our work in the fight to end the abortion pill for good, visit restoration-news.com, where we publish hard-hitting news, commentary, and investigative deep dives that always put America first. That's restoration-news.com. I'm Hayden Ludwig, and we'll see you next time.